In May, Chris and I had taken Elves and Dwarves to the super themey doubles tournament, 7 Stones. Your results in day 1 determine which knockout group you'll go into on day 2. Just like 2 other teams in our pod, we'd won 1 game but lost 2, which meant that the results were super close. We were therefore kept guessing as to which of the 4 groups we'd end up in. At the pub, on the evening of day 1, we found out our fate. We would be in the lowliest of the groups, Spoon Group. That might seem like a strange thing to get excited about, but it meant that we'd be playing Graham and Hayden in game 1. We formed a core wargaming group over the years, and Graham and Hayden had brought a gloriously stupid list. We'd never even had 2 of us match up at an MESBG event before, let alone having all 4 of us at the table at the same time. It was quite possible that it was going to destroy our friendship. It was also quite possible it would be worth it. Welcome then to Battle Camper, and day 2 of 7 Stones 2023. So, after a quick shower and an even quicker breakfast, we headed back to the venue for what was sure to be the great battle of our time. There's a bit of fluff and lore behind our army, and so I suggest you watch part 1 first. Or, if you don't want to, watch J-Mac's video at the link in the description. Otherwise, here's my patented 10-second whistle-stop tour. Our army represents the first stage deterioration in relations between the Elves of Lothlorien and Dwarfs of Nauglador. We have Thingol using the rules for Celeborn, Rumil using the rules for Rumil, Nauglador using the rules for Durin, and a dwarf captain. You'll also remember, if you've seen part 1, that we got a special card for having a best army nomination. That grants us a buff. In our case, our army leader, Nauglador, can attempt to cast the channeled version of the command spell every turn, on a roll of a 4+, without depleting his own supply of will. Anyway, before we dive in, just to remind you that, as always, my miniatures are assigned to my patrons. This is to find out who's lucky, who's unlucky, and to track their great deeds. All the assignments are in the pictures on screen now. In the last video, Chris Murfitt's Rumil absolutely smashed it. Let's see if he can retain that crown. As I mentioned on day 1, Graham and Hayden had brought Groblog's company. That's Groblog, the Balrog, Sauron, and a random orc that they called Broglob. Obviously, Groblog was the army's leader. The game was no escape from the doubles section in the matched play guide. In short, this means that each army has a primary and a secondary force. You get points for killing the leaders of the primary and secondary forces, for breaking the enemy, and for having a banner at the end of the game. Graham and Hayden had their work cut out for them. Sauron might be their secondary force leader, but Groblog was their primary force leader. If we killed both Groblog and Broglob, we would break them. One last thing, remember we have a special rule to represent our declining relations between elves and dwarves, and that is that at the start of each game we are green allies, we roll a d6 at the beginning of each turn, and on a 1 our alliance degrades, first from green to yellow, and then from yellow to red. The elves deployed in 2 clumps, with Thingol's group tucked between a hobbit hole and the river. Right out of the gate, they were being menaced by the Balrog. Rumil's group tucked away behind the hobbit hole, basically acting as reserves ready to respond as events developed. Sauron and Broglob advanced menacingly on that little vegetable patch there. Meanwhile, the dwarves hadn't even made it onto camera yet. They were off on that side of the board.
Right, does our alliance go down? No.
No, thank God. We need that resistance magic. So, priority turn 1.
Alright. Or 4. 5.
Any heroics?
No heroics.
I don't.
March.
Heroic
Sorry.
march, yeah.
Sorry. No heroics from me.
Heroic march.
Spend your might.
So, with evil going first, Graham put his master plan into play.
I'm gonna go forward.
Bag of dice, I wonder?
I'm gonna spend a will and use my free point and cast Chill Soul on that person. It goes off on a 4+. It doesn't go off.
It's a good start to the game, Graham. The Balrog also moved up, and my lone contingent of elves was starting to feel quite hemmed in.
Groblog's moving strategic.
I always like listening in on people strategizing when I'm editing these videos, and today is no exception. Listen to this masterstroke.
I just think we're pretty. I don't know. I think I'm just going to assume we've lost until otherwise. You know, on the bright side, if it finishes early, we've got extra long lunch. We just go around.
No, that makes sense.
It'll be fine.
Well, I'm going to chuck a guard of the Khazad-dûm court at the Balrog, so Terra. So you basically get around the back of him. It's bloody terrain. I moved 3 guard of the Khazad-dûm court into the Balrog. Well, 1 to fight it and 2 to support. The rest of this little contingent then started crossing the river. They'd committed the Balrog because it's basically the only model on the board that we don't actually have to kill. As seems inevitable in these games now, the dwarves were just trying to get here as fast as they could. There were no shots, so we went straight into the one combat. The Balrog obviously used its free heroic combat, which it gets every single turn.
If you get 6, he's got it.
Yeah, 6.
He's got it.
No.
So that's a very dead elf.
The Balrog used the heroic simply to get into the remaining 2 Guard of the Gladrim court.
I can shield now with both of them. Yeah. So they're not supporting. Oh, it's not good. 6, you got 6. 3s. It's 3/4 of my Gladrim can't guard.
Oh, they're both dead?
Yeah, they're both dead.
Both, yeah, okay.
Okay, we're on to priority turn 2.
Okay.
Alright, go down.
Alright.
Thank God.
What?
2. You had it last turn.
Yeah, so it's your...
Any heroics?
The dwarves moved up first, trying to get to the pass over the river. After Durin finished his move, we tried his free channeled command for the first time.
So, 1 free and one of his will.
Oh, yeah.
Cast on 5.
Sure.
Have you got any will to resist? You've got 10, haven't you?
Yeah, 10. Alright,
You throw some at it?
3, yeah, I was thinking 3, yeah. Alright. Got it.
Got it on 6.
Oh my god.
After that small setback, the group of elves led by Thingol moved across the river, and Thingol had a go at his own immobilise.
Yeah, fine. Let's immobilise Balrog. We can do it on 2, so I can keep a cheeky one left over just in case. 6. Absolutely.
I don't know, yeah, I think we just chuck 2 at it then, yeah.
I'll chuck 2 at it, because I don't know.
Okay.
Oh.
So the Balrog was successfully immobilised for the turn, and after that we just finished crossing the river.
Are you fact-checking me?
Yeah.
Alright, I can move
You
there.
didn't believe me.
I go there. I'm gonna move there and chill soul. That guy. So he's spending his free one and a thingy. Yeah, he goes on a 5.
Right,
Okay.
I've got 1 die for resistant magic.
Oh, okay. Damn it.
The poor little guy, he
Yeah.
just wants to chill some souls.
Yeah, the orcs are gonna go there.
Good old Orky. We've got no combat this turn.
Priority.
So we're on to
Does
priority.
the alliance go down?
No, it does not.
After a fluffed roll, they took the priority.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're not doing anything about that.
You're not calling anything. Alright.
The first thing that Groblor's company did was charge the Balrog into 2 of my elves on the far right of the row. It was then time for Sauron and his orc.
I can charge that guy, maybe charge to kill him. I don't know if that's really suicidal, but...
It's Sauron.
That's a good point. Rolling the courage. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, right, so I'm gonna... I'll chill soul that guy.
On the way in.
Yeah, I'll chill soul that guy on the way in. With a point of will and... Yeah.
And your free 1.
And a free 1. Hey, went off on a 4.
Okay, so I've got my
Oh, God.
resistance magic. It's deep.
Oh, for God's sake.
So whilst Graham was having a hard time trying to chill any of my souls, they did manage to box me in. With the Balrog on one side and Sauron on the other, there I was, stuck in the middle with them.
The orcs...
This is not good, Chris. I need your help.
As Chris had attempted and failed again to use the free command on the Balrog, I tried to immobilise him with my last point of will. I rolled a 4 and mighted it up to a 5.
I'm gonna have to shoot 2 in it.
Alright.
So a fortunate might meant that the Balrog was now immobilised for the turn. That was a big relief, and the remaining unengaged elves tried to wrap around the Balrog to assist their king. Sauron remained engaged with his 1 elf. Then it was time for the elves by the river to move up.
Oh no, it's Strike Team Alpha, they're coming for Groblog.
Can you use Elven arrows to shoot over that building?
Sadly not, but I can shoot this orc and try and get him out of there. Yeah.
No!
Break Sauron, break Sauron! We've got an hour left. Can we get it done?
Hey, our game's usually open by now.
Yeah.
Which means we've already failed. We have shooting.
Alright.
So I'm going to put 3 arrows into orc there. We've got an in the way for the tree. Hit on 3s. 2 hits. 2 in the ways. 2 passes. That again, please. Ah, so close.
Yes.
It's like double 6. No, fuck you.
So the lone orc survived after 2 pairs of tantalising 6s. Dice truly are arseholes. Still, he was being braver than Groblog at least.
Alright, I'm going to call a heroic combat with Sauron.
Right, I'm going to call a defence with Rumil.
Rumil wasn't in combat with Sauron, but I'd called a defence just in case he came my way later. Sauron was in combat only with the last of my Guard of the Gladrim Court cohort belonging to Johnny Derbyshire, and a spearman belonging to Peter. So, in the grand MESBG roleplay, I hope at least one of you is Isildur and you're not both Elendils.
Okay, I'm shielding with both.
Okay, I'm going to
You
fight.
get a 6, you've got it. You
Oh
know.
no, I got 5.
I've got a 6, so you've got a might if you want it.
I'll spend a might. Why not? I'll might it up.
2 dead.
Yeah.
That's the last of the guard of the Electrum Court.
2 Elendils it is then. Probably wasn't worth the build-up. After winning his combat, Sauron moved in against 2 more elves, and I was very quickly running out of them.
So I'll shield with both again.
Okay, I'll fight you.
6s?
Oh Christ, okay. Come on, 6. I'm not going to might it.
No, okay. And on the Balrog, I've got, well, you rolled, if you got a 6, you got it? No.
This is what the Balrog does.
Yeah.
Winning that combat, Thingol did 2 wounds to the Balrog. Well played.
Right then, back to priority. 4.
5. Okay.
They took priority, but we called a move in order to try and get our free command off on the Balrog.
Don't fluff this one.
Fluff it.
I mean, I wouldn't say that one.
Oh, thank Christ. Okay. Excellent.
Finally, and at long last, my reinforcements arrived.
Get pretty much everything.
Oh God, the dwarves are here. The dwarves are here.
Hello.
The dwarves moved up just to get as close as they possibly could to the fiery Balrog.
Your priority now, guys.
The Balrog decided to try and fiery lash Thingol.
Fine.
Fiery lash with 3+.
Yeah.
Oh, I did it.
Pause. No, so you lash him into contact with yourself, don't you?
He's also set ablaze, so he immediately suffers strength 9 hits.
Yeah.
Ooh.
3s.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll throw a chuck of fate at that.
At the end of the turn or something like that.
Fine, I passed a fate.
On his way in, Sauron actually managed to chill soul an elf, and he failed his resistant to magic defense.
Boink. You finally chilled someone.
Hey, I did something. Right.
Finally, the orc Broglob moved behind the tree, where he was safe and sound.
Yeah. Tree. There we go. Right, Groblog. Keep running. Just keep on running. He's our only source of light, basically.
Our priority move started with a random swordsman and the love of my life, Rumil, charging Sauron. My bowman then crossed the river, joining the hunt for the random orc.
That's all my move done. I've got barely any elves left.
Yeah.
With no shooting, we went into the combats. But I was singularly focused on the water feature. I'd never been so excited to have a river on the table after Thingol had been set ablaze.
Cool.
Come on, water feature! Water feature!
The Balrog, of course, called its free heroic combat, and so Thingol called a strike. I was thinking big thoughts for the strike roll.
Oh my god, I can't take it. Yes! It's by 10. I'm also shielding. You're on 5.
Oh.
We take it on 6.
Oh.
It was then on to Sauron's combat, the big one.
4, 5, 6. I don't need to shield. I'm actually going to 2-hand with that sword there.
Oh no, 4 high.
Oh no!
That's pretty shit.
So this is the 6 normal. Yeah, we've got it.
Yeah.
Rumil ended up causing no wounds, so it was up to a single pikeman to make this all worthwhile.
So it's going to be 6s and 6s? Okay. 1 6.
Oh, 6.
That pikeman, which patron owns that pikeman?
Turns out this one also belonged to Johnny Derbyshire, who features big in this list and has redeemed himself for his poor showing in the last turn. Anyway, we went straight on to get the next turn's priority, and this could be a big one. My first move was to get Thingol into the river to stop him from burning to death.
So Quan Barrel?
I'll try Quan Barrel with Durin.
Oh no! Right.
I'm going to slow-mo that roll. 6!
With the rest of our moves, we trapped both the Balrog and Sauron, or Salrog if you will. We then sent one lone elven swordsman to go and dispatch Broglob, surely ample martial prowess for the challenge. Their only move was to get Groblog back behind that little green hobbit hole, ready to make a sketchy dash over those 2 hedges. In the fight, Chris called a strike with Nauglador, and I called a defense with Rumil. Finally, Chris had joined the battle, a whole host of dwarves and a single elf via the Balrog. Although, he still didn't really get to roll anything because I rolled the elves dual roll first, and I won it. So there was no need for any of the dwarves.
He's trapped.
Chris did get to roll up all the wounds, but he only got 1. Sauron then caused a wound to Rumil, but he saved it on his fate. After all, after Rumil's performance on day 1, we weren't going to let a pesky thing like the Dark Lord of Mordor get in his way.
Yes!
We've got the orc, now the real combat begins.
Come on, you...
Let's do it, 5.
Oh, it's a big effort. No! Did you see it was? It was like 5.
The orc had won this round, but it was not over. We took priority, once again, going into the next turn. Once again, we just closed in around the 2 big bads, and of course I sent more elves against Broglob. I would not let him escape again. Then my trio of archer elves simply beelined for the fleeing Groblog. Once again, Team Evil had only one move to make, and that was to tuck Groblog further behind the Hobbit hole.
Now, I think I can actually see, I can't shoot because I move 6, but I think I can see him with the archers over the house because he's on such a massive rock.
Oh no!
This was an opportunity for us to finally finish off the Balrog, move on to the characters who are actually going to score us some points for this turn. So we didn't take any chances. We struck with both Kings of Elfdom and Dwarfdom. Thingol only rolled a 1, but fortunately Nauglador got up to fight 10. Both parties rolled 6s, so we went to a roll-off. With my elven made weapon, we would be winning it on a 3+. Then we just had to try and wound the damn thing. Fortunately, we had plenty of dice to do it with.
Yep, so that's 1. There you go, that's another 1. It did. It killed the Balrog, so.
With the Balrog gone, there's now just 2 combats left to do. Broglob, the Lone Orc, and Sauron.
Right, which one do you want to do first, guys?
I don't really. Yeah, should we try Sauron? I'm gonna try and roll a 6. I roll a 5.
On a 6. So that's a wound? Oh, actually. That's a fucking wound, dude. Rumil's fucking kicking ass.
Yeah.
So, Rumil not only wins a second fight against Sauron in a row, but there's a second wound against Sauron as well. What a unit. Then we were finally onto the main event. 1 orc via a lot of elves.
Big one.
Here we go.
I'm going to... I'm going to two-hand with the... So I've already won it. Okay. He's dead.
I know, what the orc? Priority. 5.
No.
Right.
Re-roll it, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to re-roll with the ring jury.
Oh, you got it.
Sorry.
Hey, you said to do it. I said no such thing.
We decided that our best approach now would be to ignore Sauron and send everyone after the rogue Groblog.
I can march with the captain.
All right, let's send everyone but Rumil that way. Actually, he doesn't have defense anymore, so I'm gonna feed him one of the archers, and we'll send everyone else that way.
So, 1 archer tied up Sauron, and the entire rest of the combined battle host went off in search of the rogue Groblog. Respect to Groblog, rather than just running away, he charged the closest dwarf. Then we were into combats.
It's me versus the archer. I'll call heroic combat with Sauron.
So first, Sauron v the archer.
You've got 6. And he's dead.
They used their heroic combat to slingshot over towards Groblog, trying to hold back the tide. And then we were on to Groblog himself.
6! Yeah.
Now we see if he can actually get a kill.
5, okay.
Come on, Groblog. Groblog. Oh, Christ.
You clown!
At least Sauron took out his righteous fury on this dwarf, killing him outright. Going into the home stretch, they finally took priority. I think for the first time in the game, and there was nothing we could do to steal it back. They moved Sauron into Nauglador, chill-souling another dwarf as they did. Then it was time for Groblog to continue his miraculous escape as he scrambled up to the top of the hedge.
Right, our movement is done.
We continued the pursuit in our move, and the dwarf captain also hopped up onto the hedge.
He's shooting.
2 shots at Groblog. 2 hits. 1 wound.
Unfortunately, they fluffed their role with Groblog's only fate. They took the ballsy move of spending the rest of his 2 might in order to pass it. So, onto our only fight for the turn, Sauron.
Oh yeah, see if we get 6.
No, 5! Right, come on, oh, shit. Right, well, that's it.
With his strikes, Chris managed to remove Sauron's final wounds, which of course meant he was on his 2+ save.
1 wound.
1 wound on a 2-up.
Don't get a fucking 1 here.
Come on! Yay! The ring sustains.
In the next turn, they took priority again, which meant that Sauron could charge Nauglador, and Groblog could continue his escape over the hedges.
In Groblog.
He's going to do this jump test.
Okay, don't get a 1. No, he's fine, jumps across.
He then just needed to climb down the other side to make good on his escape.
He falls!
It was then time for the dwarf captain to make his own jump tests in pursuit.
There you go.
Climb down.
Jump on.
He also then just needed to climb down.
Actually land on him. That's it.
Do that. Oh no!
So Groblog and the dwarf captain were both prone, But that didn't stop the rest of the force closing in, the elves appropriately all making their climb tests. In the Sauron combat, he rended Durin, bringing him down to 1 wound with a lucky fate save from Chris.
I think we can squeeze one last turn in, guys. I suggest you just put one model into the Sauron, keep him stay where he is, everyone else. There's just no point in getting him killed, giving him points.
That's exactly what we did, driving ever closer to the final showdown. Can Groblog survive? If we get a 6, we take it.
Right, Groblog. So, Captain.
Yeah, it's dead now.
There you go. It's obviously he was going to die. Anyway, thus ends the flight of the Groblog. I would say he did well, but in reality, he left the field of battle immediately, tripped over a hedge, and then got killed. The final score was 9-1. Kudos to Graham and Hayden for bringing such an excellent force. They'd planned it some months earlier on a long drive. I just love that army leader Groblog left Sauron and the Balrog behind to cover his escape whilst he scrambled through a hobbit's garden and over their hedge. Realistically, this army was never really going to work, and that's what makes it great. So we were through to the quarterfinals, where we'd be playing Martin Seed and Amy Ross, and a force that I've actually never come across before on the tabletop, the Fellowship. The game was Lords of Battle, which of course wasn't an ideal one for us, because of course it's about killing things, and we've got more things to kill than they do. And everything they have for us to kill has might and fate. On the plus side, they did have some squishy hobbitses and Bill the Pony to pulverise, although that latter target would prove controversial. We took the first turn's priority and we just moseyed on forwards. There was no spells to cast because there was nothing in range.
Cool, I think that's our move.
Just don't kill Bill, please.
I don't think I've got the heart for it, yeah.
I think Gandalf's going to try a Sorcerer's Blast.
So they were going to try and Sorcerous Blast the Dwarf Banner. They used a free point of will plus 2 of Gandalf's store.
And we need a 5 to cast it.
An unlucky roll for such a heavy investment in will, they decided to might it to bring it up to a 5. It was a worthwhile move though, because the strength 5 hit killed the dwarf and we lost the banner. Such is the power of a well-placed Sorcerer's Blast. The only casualty in the shooting phase was one of my bow elves. They took priority and we didn't really need to call any heroics to stop them from doing anything in particular, so they rushed forward and clogged up that little line in the centre there. After that we moved up, trying to flow around these pesky rocks to get as close as possible as quickly as possible. To blunt Aragorn's killing power we used our free channeled command and actually cast it on a 6 for once. They spent all 3 of Aragorn's will to decast it and only managed a 4, so they then spent his free might and an additional might, really draining resources, but putting a stop to the command. We then finished moving up. We were trying to close ground with the hobbits, who were obviously much squishier targets than the 3 hunters, and Gandalf. In typical MESBG fashion, there was arrows flying in both directions with no casualties, and we were on to the fights. Boromir called a heroic combat, and there was nothing else called this turn.
Yeah, I'll shield, yeah.
2 more then.
It's good. You haven't got a banner, have you? So I'll spend another might.
Not anymore, we don't. No, sorry.
So Boromir spent the might to win, but couldn't kill the dwarf. We lost a couple more dwarves in the subsequent fights, but going into the next turn is where something truly terrible happened.
So does our alliance degrade?
It does!
We took priority, but the Fellowship called a move. They were getting the hobbits the hell out of there, and they were also shuffling up into our limited line between those 2 rocks there. We tried to get the rest of our models over there as quickly as possible, but scrabbling over these difficult terrain rocks made it slow progress. With Aragorn drained of will, we threw our free channeled command at him and managed to get it off on a 4, so he was immobilised for the turn and a half fight. Otherwise, we were just starting to panic a little bit about whether or not the rest of our guys would get there in time to turn the tide.
Well, these guys are like, just help us, like, we need help.
We're maintaining the formation.
Just a single dwarf died in the fights, and we were back to the next turn. They got priority, and the hobbits continued to make good on their escape, and this was feeling awfully familiar. The bulk of our forces were yet to engage anything, and they still had 1 big rock to clamber over before they could do anything useful. Those who did make it tried to help hold the Fellowship's most mighty heroes in place. There was then no fatalities in either the shooting or the fight phase, so we're just blowing right on through to the next turn. We took priority, they called a move, we counter-called with the dwarf captain and his last point of might, but they won it. This meant our magic was turned off for the turn, but we did manage to catch some of those fleeing hobbits. We were ready to put some of these marvellous creatures to the sword. Disturbingly, and contrary to earlier promises, we also charged Bill the Pony.
Should we fight Bill the Pony first?
Yeah.
So this is Johnny Derbyshire's Guard of the Khazad-dûm Court fighting Bill the Pony. What a bastard.
3. A 4.
That victory was short-lived. With Bill counting as a banner, they re-rolled and got to a 6, and there was nothing we could do about it.
I mean, I'm quite happy about losing to the Bill banner, to be honest. That suits me. As long as you don't kill him. But...
Kills it.
Yes, Bill.
You'll get away from my pony!
So there you go, Johnny. Your guard, the Gladrun Court, was just killed trying to slay Bill the pony, and I think you got exactly what you deserved. Yet again, it was a pretty bloodless combat phase until we got to Boromir versus Thingol and Nauglador.
So strike roll for Durin?
Strike roll, Durin.
I mean, I think we just, yeah, it's fine, that's up to 10.
I'll shoot.
Okay. 5, so 6 will take it for us. Thingol, then I need to do sword as well, we got 6.
Yeah.
Because Boromir was trapped, we were doing a mountain of attacks.
Yes, of course. So, Durin, 2 6s.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Nice.
One more and he's dead.
Durin, this is Thingol.
No, he's not dead.
A disappointing roll from Thingol. It all came down to the dwarf captain.
Come on. That'll do it.
Damn it.
I think that captain has basically done all of the work for this entire tournament. It was then time for Gandalf versus an elf with 2 supports.
Oh, not a big start. 6. You're not trapped yet, easy moves. 2 6s.
Sadly for Gandalf, he promptly failed his fate rolls, and then failed them again. He spent and passed his last point, but he's now out of fate with only 2 wounds remaining.
So priority 6. Lucky guys.
This was going to be a big moment. The tides were turning very much in our favour, and they needed to do something to pull things back. In a story now very familiar, we won priority, they called a move, we called a move, and they won the roll-off. Once again, the hobbits wanted out, and we were giving chase. Merry had been ever so brave and decided to stay behind and hold up the entire horde to allow the others to escape. All he had to do was clamber down off that little rock there.
Right, Mary, you hold the barrel.
What is it with this event and models falling off things? Whatever the case, it left Merry in a very precarious situation indeed, and we were all too happy to exploit it. Frodo rushed through this gap to pair my Fight 6 elf off Gandalf. Meanwhile, Thingol, Rúmil and 2 elves had thoroughly surrounded Gimli.
I'll strike with Thingol.
In response, they struck with Gimli.
Yo, strike off, classic.
We also struck with Nauglador, who was in combat with Legolas. We started with Merry, fighting for his life backed up against that little wall.
He's gonna die.
Oh, it's a big effort. Oh, unlucky. It's a double slice.
Heartless bastard.
Well, that's a big fluff.
A fluff it might have been, but they only had one fate. They had to pass it, or he would die.
Oh no, the pressure.
Unlucky.
Damn it.
Next was a heavily trapped Gimli versus a banner bearer, a regular elf, Rúmil and Thingol.
Next. Okay, so we've got a strike off.
You do it, it's important.
I'm up to 9. Got it.
Now you have to beat
5 so far. 6. Rúmil. Not yet. The banner -1. No, and my regular swordsman. Okay, so I'm going to do a few things. Sorry, Lord of the West on Thingol. No. Banner reroll on Thingol. No. I'm going to swift parry your 6. There we go, okay.
With a lucky strike roll and unlucky fate roll, Gimli then went down to Thingol alone. Next it was time for Nauglador versus Legolas. Starting with the Dwarf King's strike roll.
goes up to 9.
Yeah. Is that 2s?
Yeah.
Dude, you're dice rolling.
There we go, Merry, Gimli and Legolas in 3 successive combats. Fortunately, Gandalf and Frodo, despite losing their combats, both survived, and Aragorn won his, although didn't manage to actually kill anything. With that, we're back to the new turn.
Yeah, does our alliance go down? No, I basically just dropped that one. So red allies down. Priority.
There wasn't actually all that much left for us to do in this game. We just kept chipping wounds off the heroes. We killed Pippin, we killed Sam, and we killed Gandalf. With some of the most appalling rolling I've ever seen, the Fellowship really struggled to kill almost anything in return. And then, I must confess, came one of my most shameful moments in wargaming ever. It started when Chris needed a target for his channeled command, and the only model in range was Bill.
But I can do a magic power on Bill.
I can command Bill.
Oh my god.
Get back here.
Now who's the asshole?
What's half his movement? 4, okay. I'd like to send it further this way.
What? Why?
I don't know.
Bring him back.
Himself. Now who's the dick?
We're going to break them.
What, by killing Bill the pony?
Yes, by killing Bill the pony.
You hear that? Chris wanted to send Bill away to safety, and I wanted to bring him back to the slaughter. I was that desperate for a wooden spoon with some felt tip scribblings on it. To answer your question, Chris, I'm the arsehole. I am. If it helps, the ensuing combats didn't go very well for us. Let's start with Aragorn v Rumil.
So I've got 2 on Rumil, 3s. I've got 2 a spear and a pike. Oh, there was a 6. I'm going to ask you I'm going to swift parry the 6.
Aragorn spent his last point of might to win, but he needs 6s to wound me.
He's a complete asshole.
That's the first time he's died this tournament, and it was justice. Nextly and lastly, it was time for Bill the pony.
So I'm rooting for Bill here, but at the same time, that's Thingol's roll.
Yes.
Okay, and 1 for my elf. 3. So I've got Lord of the West. No. No. Is that banner's 3 inches out? Is it? It looks like it, doesn't it? Yep. Cool. Bill has beaten Thingol.
He defeated Thingol and 3 other elves, he humiliated them. That's clearly what the public wanted. That brought the game to an end. After one of the unluckiest streaks in all of wargaming for the Fellowship, we had a solid win, and it put us through to the final for the Wooden Spoon. So with 1 game to go, the tournament was finally coming to a close. It had once again met and exceeded my expectations with a wonderful selection of extremely well-presented boards. But this late in the day, we weren't interested in that. We were interested in the selection of prizes. These ranged from the very good to the downright extraordinary. All we were interested in were the spoons. Maybe a Freddo or 2. And we had 1 game left to get through to get them. So we come to it at last, the great battle of our weekend. We'd be playing James Wilson and Ben Camp at the top table of the bottom group. It would be some tragic elf-on-elf violence as they brought Rivendell and Lothlórien. Leading the Rivendell half was father-daughter duo Elrond and Arwen, and the Lothlórien was led by Galadriel, Celeborn and Haldir. At 7 Stones, the last game is always domination, except instead of using 5 objectives, we use 7. Those 7 objectives are highlighted on screen now. We decided to deploy as aggressively as possible, right up at the centre objective, forming a big sort of V-wedge thing. They deployed defensively. They drew standard lines at the back of the board, blocking up those 2 main thoroughfares. Now before we go into first turn, a quick note about this game. You're probably expecting me to say right now that there's been a technical error, but there hasn't. There's just been more of a plain old incompetence error. The footage on screen now is the main overhead camera sped up to 4000%. You'll see we spend the majority of the time with the entire board blocked by head and or back. It rendered this camera essentially unusable. There were also some audio problems thrown in for good measure. Therefore in this game I'm going to be mainly narrating, with as much of the close-up camera work that I can recover. Many apologies to James and Ben, I hope you don't feel shortchanged by this. We took first turn priority and there were no heroics, so we just ploughed forward. They didn't really move at all, content to sit, shoot and magic us to death. We therefore ploughed straight on into turn 2, where there was basically the same again. The reason we were pushing as far as we possibly could is because we figured that the more board control we exerted now, the more forgiving mistakes would be later. There was a shooting phase which was entirely blocked out by my decaying husk of a human body, but they did manage to snipe out one of my archers. He had been hanging out on the far left flank with Rumil's warband. So that's just another movement phase in which our lines are edging closer and closer together. It's certainly the most orderly battle we've had all tournament so far, and hopefully Chris and I will maintain the synergy that dwarves and elves are meant to be good together for. That's high strength attackers in the front line and high fight supporters in the back line. Then, wouldn't you believe it, a thing happened. A thing finally happened. Arwen moved into our front line and decided to cast Wrath of Bruinen. In a big 6 moment, it even killed my banner bearer, and of course he could not pass it on. After that, they sprung their trap, moving up across the entire line and tagging up all of our now prone warriors. So, they were being sneaky boys and sending a single elf around the side of this house here to try and snag one of the objectives. We left 2 elves behind to deal with it. A third of mine then headed into the open square that we'd effectively cordoned off to pick up the central objective. Finally, the dwarf captain had tagged up this stray elf that had managed to slip through the line. Concerningly, the main line on the right here was already starting to fray, and some of the enemy elves were starting to slip through the gap. With there still being about half an hour left in the game, if this line didn't hold, they'd win. A number of objectives over on this side of the board were still completely undefended. However, our full pressure strategy must have been working somewhat, because the sneaky elf that had come to steal an objective moved back again. Further, I moved one of these backline elves out into the open to try and snag up that last objective by the house, and it was promptly sniped out by the elf in the tower. Clearly, he should have been zigzagging when he was just walking in a straight line. In the following combats, they won a lot of fights, but they really struggled to make the damage stick. Meanwhile, we managed to take a couple of elves off in return. In the move phase, we continued in our two little clumps. We were just trying to tag up everyone we possibly could in order to stop them from breaking through and getting onto the objectives, and that was it. We didn't have to kill anything, we just had to survive. We won priority, but they spent all 4 of Elrond's foresight points, which he generated at the start of the game. Those were points well spent because we no longer had the might left to counter with our own heroic move. You'll see in the right hand clump it meant that they could tag up the models where they wanted them to be and free up a few of their elves to slip through and potentially get onto some objectives in the last few turns of the game. For example, this little guy slipping through by the house now. I only have 1 mini on that central objective, so anyone that gets through is problematic for us. A bit of a disaster this turn. Our powerhouse on the left hand side of the board, Rumil, was slain for the 2nd game in a row. Come on, Rumil. Resting on your laurels after yesterday's successes. Things were extremely tight going into the last turn. We contested the central objective, and they held 1 objective on their side, but we held 2 on ours. However, having done a lot of work against the contingent on the left-hand side, we now had some free models to play with. This included sending 1 dwarf to nab up the still uncontested objective on the backline, and having a guard of the Gladthrim Court snag up the objective by the house in their deployment zone. This meant that, despite having made a colossal mess of the main combats on the right-hand side, we could still snag a victory. I put this entirely and 100% down to the way we deployed in the first place. Taking that aggressive position, moving forward as fast as possible, meant that mistakes were more forgiving for us, because they still didn't have time to get onto the objectives before the game ended. Still, we were definitely outplayed in the combats themselves, and some poor luck on Ben's part meant that even though he was winning fights against the dwarves, he was struggling to kill any of them. It was a great game and a good end to the tournament, so thanks very much to James and Ben. But at the end of the day, there can only be one champion of Crap Group. There you go, that's the extent of the self-adulation that being crowned Chief of Crap Group earns you. However, I do note something interesting. Chris and I got the spoon, despite having won 4 of our 6 games. And this fits into a bit of a pattern because every time at least 2 of our little group, Graham, Hayden, Chris and myself, attend a tournament together, one of us always comes away with a spoon. Graham took it at Scouring of Cheshire 2023. Hayden took it at Scouring 2022. I took it when Hayden and I went to a 7th City Legion tournament. And Chris and I collectively took it when we went to a doubles 40k event. So this weekend simply continued our long and noble tradition of being provably bad at the one thing I set up a channel to do in the first place. But it wasn't just us going home with something. Seven Stones has probably the most extensive selection of prizes of any event in the GBHL. Watch. This continued for some time until it seemed the climax of the entire event arrived. The capacity to win a stick in the raffle. Not to fret for those who didn't win an actual literal stick. You could also win a framed picture of one of the TOs, Tom. Although for the true Tom fans in the crowd, losing this one left a sour taste. Anyway, after all the prizes and a light spot of tidying up, we headed back to the van. Thanks again to my patrons. I'm going to be assigning some new miniatures shortly because I'm taking Rohan for the first time since I started my patron miniature assigning thing to a few events in the autumn. So let's hope your star shines bright like Chris Murfitt's Roomil and is not a fun-sucking black hole like Johnny Derbyshire's guard of the Khazad-dûm court killed by a pony. However, in the circumstances, I do think I needed that one-man lesson in humility after attempting such a shameful act, and therefore, you will still be my MVP. As a result, I'm going to send you a gift, this custom Battle Camper dice rolling tray. Ooh! Remember, if you want to join the Patreon, the link is in the description. The higher tier you are, the more models you're likely to be assigned. Otherwise, join the Facebook group, and otherwise, just a heartfelt thanks very much for watching. Now enjoy this footage of me being reunited with my dog after the first time spending a night away from her.
Hello.